I have a story to tell you about this land where we're gathered here. It's a story that goes back a very long time, through thousands of years of forest development, followed by 150 years of rapid change. I offer this story to you as a gift, in case it may help all of us, as it has certainly helped me, to extend our roots deeper into the soil in this place we all live, to develop a deeper sense of place and an awareness for the web of life within which we are all embedded. I would like to begin by personally acknowledging that we're gathered here on the traditional, unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. Myself, probably like many people in this room, I was not born here. My great-great-grandfather was a settler from Scotland. He left a very tough life there as a landless sheep farmer and fisherman to have a go at farming the Great Plains of North America. Many generations later, I was born in Saskatoon. Saskatoon, it's a pretty place if you've ever been there, but it's pretty flat too, and there's not a whole lot of forest. So I often joke that the luckiest thing that ever happened to me is that when I was 5 years old, my family picked up and moved us here to Vancouver. I love it here. We have the ocean, we have the mountains, those incredible rainforests. You know, there's like a wild, inspiring side to the nature here. And I think that when you come from somewhere else, or even if you're from here, but you leave for a while and then come back, then you can really appreciate the beauty of the nature. So I grew up actually very close to campus here. I grew up in the neighborhood of Dunbar, which is just uphill from the Musqueam Indian Reservation. As I get older, looking back, I realized that I had an awful lot of privilege and opportunity growing up. I got to spend lots of time in the outdoors, hiking, camping, skiing, mountain biking. And around the time that I finished high school, I started getting into climbing. I ended up spending about 5 years traveling the world, climbing some of the highest peaks. When I came home from those travels, I continued climbing the local mountains, but I realized that something had changed. It wasn't the mountains themselves that had changed, but it was my experience on the way to climb those mountains, hiking through those towering rainforests, deep, layered forests of an almost indescribable green. And sometimes I'd be hiking along and I'd come across a tree that just seemed impossibly tall. And you could tell it was just so old just by looking at it. But most of the time, the forest was quite young. And you could equally tell that that forest was recovering from some logging events of the past. So it was in the forest that I started getting this feeling like, well, I still don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's like there was lessons embedded there in what I was seeing, but I just didn't know how to read them yet. So I started spending a lot more time exploring the forest and trying to document those old trees that remained, and I started searching for the largest and oldest trees. But as I went on, I just got more and more curious about what was going on. I really wanted to understand. So I decided to go back to school. I did my undergrad here at UBC in the Faculty of Forestry, and then I did my Master's of Science at McGill University, where I developed expertise specifically in the old growth forests of this region. And after my studies there, and before I launched into my career in forestry, and came back to start my PhD, I went traveling again. This time I went and I traveled the world's forests in search of the largest and the oldest trees. Through all of these experiences in education and my career experience, I've gained perspective. And I think I've finally started to uncover some of those lessons that I knew was in the forest. And these lessons extend well beyond the forest to sustainability and our relationship with the environment in general. So I'd like to share them with you. And to do that, I'm going to have to take you out on a journey into the forest and into the past to show you what I've seen. So the type of forests in this part of the world are what we call coastal temperate rainforests. It's quite a rare forest type globally. These forests are dominated by long-lived coniferous tree species, such as the Douglas fir seen here. The Douglas fir lives for well over 1,000 years, and it's believed to be the third tallest tree species on Earth. The tallest today is nearly 100 meters in height, and that's down in southern Oregon. It's very humid in this forest type. Like, it really rains a lot. In fact, it rains so much here that wildfires are quite rare in comparison to most other forest types worldwide. And in the absence of fire, the forest is able to get older and older. And as the forest ages through time, it develops an increasingly complex and layered structure, eventually developing after several hundred years into what we call an old growth forest. And it's within these old growth forests that we find a wide range of values that are otherwise absent in young forests. And I'll show you exactly what I mean as we now stare into an old growth forest. So there's large trees with cultural heritage values. There's dead standing and fallen trees, which provide habitat for a wide variety of creatures that live in the forest. Of course, all that plant matter and those soils store a huge amount of carbon, which is important to regulating the global climate. The understory plants provide wild edible berries and medicines used traditionally for thousands of years by First Nations people. There's critical habitat for endangered species in old growth forests. Of course, if we wanted, we could harvest the forest to provide valuable timber products. And it's really within only these very old forests that we find large western red cedar trees used in traditional First Nations carving. So in my master's degree, I developed a method so that we could actually go out into the forest and measure these values. And then we could ask, if we were to cut a forest like that down, how long would it take all these values to recover? I'll show you just a quick highlight of my thesis results. So if you look about halfway along the sequence of forest recovery, you'll see that after about 100 years, many of these values, and here you're looking at timber and carbon storage, have substantially recovered. But if you look at the purple wedge on top, habitat for an endangered wildlife species, the marbled murrelet, only began to recover after 125 years. Large trees with heritage value, that's the red wedge on the right, only began to recover after 150 years. And if you can spot the light orange wedge on the top right of that circle, that's showing us that those large western red cedar trees used in traditional First Nations carving showed no substantial sign of recovery even 2 centuries following logging. So let me emphasize that these old growth forests are very important. There's a wide range of values we only find in the old growth forest. So let me also emphasize that these old growth forests once covered the vast majority of this region. Imagine that even just 150 years ago, right where you're sitting, may have once stood some of the tallest, largest organisms on the planet. There was a very vast and particularly grand old growth forest that once covered this region, known historically as the Great Vancouver Forest. It supported a highly productive ecosystem, as well as a large population of indigenous people who had intricate uses for every single plant in the forest, yet they rarely ever felled the great trees. In contrast, when the settlers and the colonial government arrived, they very much looked at the forests and they saw a timber resource that they could exploit. In 1863, the first sawmill was established at present-day North Vancouver, and logging became a mainstay of the region's early growing economy. It was only about 133 years ago that the city of Vancouver was formally incorporated. At the time, it was really just a village of a few thousand people, if you can imagine. But it was in the same year that the Canadian Pacific Railroad construction project was completed, connecting this region to the much larger markets and population centers in the east. And this ushered in a new era of intense settler in-migration and speculative growth. The First Nations people were dispossessed of their ancestral lands. Those 1,000-year-old trees were felled, hauled to the shoreline, and exported to market all around the world. Their stumps were burned, axed, and often dynamited to clear the ground. These are some of the stories of our city's past that have largely been forgotten. And as I've worked to uncover some of these stories, none are so curious as the reports of just how tall the trees in this region once grew. In fact, there's reports of trees from the past that were once much taller than any living tree on Earth today. In particular, the Douglas fir in regions such as Kerrisdale, which is near where I grew up, and also in Lynn Valley on the North Shore, were reported to be over 120 meters in height. That's 400 feet. And to get a sense of what that scale looks like, can you see the little people standing at the base of that tree? And for further sense of scale, that would be more than twice as tall as Brock Commons, the tallest wood structure in the world. Of course, we'll never know exactly how accurate these reports were because these trees are long gone. We can't verify their height. In their place, a sprawling metropolis of 2.5 million people now covers the area, presumably reducing the old-growth forest to remnants. And a similar pattern has played out across the rest of coastal BC. This map shows us that very few areas, those in green, still have more than half of their old-growth forest remaining. The areas in red have less than 10%. So even in far-flung areas of the coast of BC, the old-growth forests have been greatly reduced. And logging, this is really important to know, is that logging these ancient ecosystems continues today. So as we step back into the present, having witnessed some of what has happened in the past, I believe there's a responsibility among all of us, among our government and our foresters, to ensure that moving forward we manage these forests more sustainably and much more equitably. And there's much work to be done. But the first is really to recognize what has happened and be honest with ourselves, because then we can take stock of what options we have in terms of what to do with those forests that remain. So what does remain? Well, first of all, anywhere that those old-growth forests were cut down but then left to regrow, we have a fascinating biological legacy. Those trees that were cut down were so large that even their stumps are a sight to behold. Stumps such as these, and by the way, this is western red cedar, these stumps are found in recovering forests all around the Vancouver area, and they are a testament to the ubiquity and the incredible size of these old-growth trees. And you're probably wondering what remains of the actual old-growth forests. Well, it's far less than there used to be, but I'm happy to report that there's actually quite a bit of old-growth forest left in this region, including in places that you may visit frequently. And once you get above about 600 meters elevation in the mountains, it's mostly old-growth forest. It's not the same huge trees as we see at low elevation, but it's old-growth forests. What I want to focus on, though, is the majestic ancient forests right here at UBC. Many people are quite surprised to learn that we have quite an incredible old-growth forest right next to our campus, along the south and west sides. This forest acts as an ancient skyline, visible from all across campus, and many of us see these trees every day, and perhaps some of you have seen those bald eagles flying around in the forest there. But have you ever wondered how old and how large those trees actually are? Well, here, let me show you my favorite tree. Seen in the center there? This tree is visible from my office in the forestry building. And as you hike up and get closer to this tree, you realize it grows out of this deep canyon. It's actually way bigger than it seems from afar. In fact, it's 64.5 meters height, about 200 feet. And with this wide, complex crown that's been forming over the course of centuries, this is believed to be the third largest grand fir tree in all of British Columbia. There's many Douglas firs that are about 400 years old, such as these. These guys are down at trail number 7. And the largest tree in the geographic vicinity of our campus here, I believe, is this one. This towering, centuries-old Douglas fir really is actually right beside the popular tourist destination of Wreck Beach. That's Wreck Beach right at the bottom. I don't think many people actually notice this tree very much, or probably most people don't know it's there, because even I didn't know it was there until Ralph Kellman showed me. This is a picture of Ralph standing at the base of that tree. Ralph, he has an unwavering appreciation for these big trees. Him and other big tree searchers, or big tree hunters, as some people like to call them, they have been driven to discover and document the largest and oldest trees across the province because they understand the importance of protecting them. And they also understand the value of sharing the stories of these big trees with the general public to help garner support for preservation of old-growth forests across the province. These old trees are incredibly charismatic. They act as a sort of persona of the forest, and many people, many different people, find them interesting. And many people connect with them. And once that connection is established, it acts as like a pathway for people to kind of personally understand not just the beauty and the importance of these ancient ecosystems, but also their vulnerability. They start to understand what's at stake if the old-growth forests are to be cut down. When I was in my undergrad at UBC, me and my classmates, we were learning all too well about what was at stake. It's not just the forest, it's everything. We were studying the scope of impacts of climate change, deforestation in tropical countries. We were learning about rising species extinction rates around the world. It was deeply concerning, it still is. So I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't too sure what I would do. But I realized there's an opportunity here with all that I was learning about these old growth forests and the forests in general. I decided that I might be able to leverage a much broader awareness of old growth forests and other environmental issues across British Columbia if I was to help connect people with these big trees. So I started planning and leading hikes. I started taking hundreds of people out to see old growth forests all across this region. And I saw that people felt good knowing that these forests existed and connecting with them. And I saw light bulbs going off in some people's heads. Many people didn't even know that we still have old growth forests left in British Columbia. And then here they were, suddenly staring up at a 1,000-year-old giant right in their backyard. But the hundreds of people I was connecting with really wasn't enough. So I started a website. I went on the internet. I started the Vancouver Big Tree Hiking Guide. Check it out. It's up and running. It's been a lot of work to put together all by myself. But I'm happy to say that it gets about 75 views a day, which isn't much, but that adds up to about 30,000 people visiting the website each year. And what those people find when they visit the website is they'll find directions and maps to go out and see these trees for themselves, to form that personal connection. And they don't have to do all the work that I've done, because I give them stories, sharing much of what I've learned about these forests. Stories like the one I'm telling you right now. So I want to leave you guys with 3 takeaways. The first is that the legacies of our actions may be very long-lasting. And these legacies are building cumulatively over time, such as the case that old-growth forests are becoming increasingly rare across the coast of BC, and we continue to log them today. All those values associated with that old-growth forest and all the creatures that depend on the old-growth forest are being put increasingly at risk. So we need the government to step up. We need to enact better legislation and policies to protect these old trees. And until they do, we need to keep fighting. We need to connect people with the forest. We need to get people out in the forest. We need to get young people like all of you out there, because you're the next guardians of the forest. Second, this is our story. I believe that recognizing what has happened in the past, including the great age of the forests in this region and the long history of First Nations, only deepens our sense of place. It's our shared story. We all share this if we live here. I want to set the record straight on one thing. This is not a young land here. This is only a young place from a European-centric perspective. There are stories running through this landscape that go back thousands of years. As settlers, we must acknowledge the impacts of colonization on the First Nations' cultural, social, and economic well-being. So moving forward towards reconciliation, I think one of the things we can do is we can protect and co-manage the remaining old growth forests and also nurture those forests that are recovering. The last lesson is what gives me hope. Looking beyond all the losses, nature proves resilient. We might get a second chance here, you know. All across Vancouver, there's these forests that are recovering from logging, and some of those forests are now well over 100 years in age. I've personally seen for myself since I've been here, these trees grow thicker and taller over time. So we may never get back what once was, but if we embrace a long-term stewardship perspective and we let those forests grow, we might have future old growth forests for future generations. Thank you.